I am Lauren, 34 years old, and 8 years ago my fiancé left me for my best friend. The night before our wedding, leaving me with a $40,000 catering bill and a shattered life. I spent the next decade silently rebuilding my world from the ground up. Tonight, at our 10-year college reunion, he cornered me against a pillar, looked me up and down with utter disgust, and laughed. He told me that leaving me for her was the best decision he ever made because I was clearly still a nobody. I just took a sip of my sparkling water and smiled. 5 minutes later, the doors to the ballroom swung open and a billionaire CEO that everyone in the corporate world recognized walked in carrying a 5-year-old boy. My former best friend dropped her glass of wine as the CEO walked straight up to me, kissed my cheek, and the little boy yelled out, "Mommy." Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to stand up to people who underestimated your worth and want to see karma delivered perfectly. The heavy bass of the ballroom sound system vibrated through the soles of my custom Italian leather heels. It had been 10 years since I last stepped foot in this city downtown district for anything other than a closed-door corporate acquisition. Yet the smell of cheap cologne and desperate nostalgia hung in the air exactly as I expected. I stood near the edge of the dimly lit hotel ballroom, a glass of sparkling water held loosely in my right hand, watching the 10th anniversary college reunion unfold like a poorly directed play. I am currently the Senior Director of Mergers and Acquisitions for the largest tech investment conglomerate in the state, but nobody in this room knew that. I had deliberately kept my digital footprint non-existent, ensuring that my professional triumphs remained entirely separated from the ghosts of my past. Right now, I was cornered between a faux marble pillar and the man who had nearly destroyed my life. Derek leaned in, blocking my path to the exit. At 35, he still wore the same smug, self-satisfied grin that had once charmed me into accepting a diamond ring. Tonight, however, that grin was paired with a slightly tailored suit that strained at the seams and a watch that tried much too hard to look expensive. The scent of his bourbon-laced breath hit me as he took another step forward, invading my personal space with the entitlement of a man who believed the world owed him an audience. "I have to admit, Lauren, I am surprised you actually showed your face tonight," Derek sneered, his eyes raking over my deliberately understated navy dress. I had chosen it precisely because it screamed middle management to the untrained eye, completely masking the fact that it was worth more than his car. I figured you would still be hiding in some tiny apartment crying over old wedding magazines. But look at you. Still plain, still quiet, still going nowhere. I did not flinch. I did not break eye contact. I just let the silence stretch, a tactic I use daily to make nervous tech founders sweat across mahogany boardroom tables. But Derek, completely devoid of self-awareness, filled the void himself. He continued leaning his forearm against the pillar right next to my head, effectively trapping me. "Seeing you now looking so ordinary, it just confirms everything. Leaving you the night before our wedding was the best decision I ever made. Vanessa is twice the woman you could ever hope to be. She has drive, she has style, she is a winner, and you are exactly where I left you." He laughed, a short, abrasive sound that carried over the ambient noise of the ballroom. A few people nearby turned their heads, their eyes wide, with the morbid curiosity of bystanders witnessing a car crash. I recognized some of them from my past. They were waiting for me to shatter. They were waiting for the humiliated 26-year-old girl who had been left at the altar with a massive debt to resurface, to cry, to run away. I took a slow sip of my water. "Are you finished, Derek?" My voice was perfectly modulated, pitched low enough that he had to strain to hear it over the music, cold enough to make him blink in momentary confusion. "Just telling it like it is, Lauren," he scoffed, recovering his arrogance quickly. "No hard feelings, right? It is just business. Upgrades have to be made." "Upgrades!" I repeated the word, tasting like ash, but I kept my expression entirely neutral. "I suppose we all make choices regarding our investments." Before he could process the peculiar phrasing of my response, a sudden heavy silence swept through the entrance of the ballroom. The heavy double doors swung open, held back by two event staff who suddenly looked very nervous. The ambient chatter in the room did not just fade, it evaporated completely. Derek frowned, turning his head to follow the collective gaze of the room. Through the doors walked Harrison Cole. At 38, Harrison was a fixture on financial magazine covers, the billionaire CEO, whose investment firm had been aggressively acquiring and restructuring tech companies across the seaboard. He was wearing a bespoke charcoal suit, but what caused the collective gasp in the room was not his towering presence or his notorious reputation. It was the 5-year-old boy sitting comfortably on his hip. Leo, my son, was wearing a miniature blazer that matched his father, his little arms wrapped securely around Harrison's neck. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. No one in this room of mid-level managers and struggling entrepreneurs expected a titan of industry to crash their college reunion. I watched the color drain from Derek's face. His jaw slackened. As the regional branch manager of a failing tech firm currently begging for a buyout to avoid mass layoffs, Derek knew exactly who Harrison Cole was. His entire career, his heavily mortgaged lifestyle, and his desperately inflated ego currently rested in the palm of Harrison's hand. Harrison's sharp, dark eyes scanned the room, bypassing the gaping faces of my former classmates until they locked onto me. The hard, predatory edge he wore for the cameras instantly melted. A genuine warm smile broke across his face. He walked with purpose, ignoring the frantic whispers erupting around him, cutting a straight path toward the corner, where Derek was currently rooted to the floor in absolute paralysis. Derek scrambled backwards, stumbling over his own dress shoes to get out of Harrison's way, his previous arrogance vanishing into sheer, unadulterated terror. Harrison stopped right in front of me. He leaned down, placing a soft, lingering kiss on my cheek, his free hand resting securely on the small of my back. "I am sorry to interrupt your evening, sweetheart," Harrison said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly in the dead quiet of the room. But Leo absolutely insisted he needed his mother to tuck him in, and frankly, I did not have the heart to tell him no. Leo beamed, reaching out for me. "Mommy, you said you would read the dinosaur book." "I did say that, did not. I, my love," I murmured, running my hand through Leo's dark hair before looking up at my husband. "You are right on time, Harrison." From across the room, the sharp, unmistakable sound of shattering glass pierced the silence. I shifted my gaze past Harrison's shoulder. Vanessa, draped in a flashy sequined dress that I knew for a fact her boutique's dwindling accounts could not afford, stood frozen near the bar. The stem of her wineglass was still clutched in her hand, while the bowl lay in glittering shards at her feet, a pool of red wine seeping into the expensive carpet like blood. She was staring at me, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. I looked back at Derek. He was hyperventilating, his eyes darting frantically between Harrison Cole, the child calling me mommy, and me. The man who had just bragged about his massive upgrade was currently suffocating under the weight of his own insignificance. I smiled. It was a cold, razor-sharp expression. The night had only just begun. The shock vibrating through the ballroom was a tangible electric current, but as I stood there enveloped in the protective presence of my husband and son, my mind violently snapped back to the exact moment this war had begun. The contrast between the absolute power I held in this room tonight and the crushing vulnerability I experienced 8 years ago was staggering. I needed to remember the pain of that night. I needed to let the ghost of the 26-year-old Lauren surface for just a fraction of a second, so that the execution of my current plan would be carried out with the merciless precision it required. 8 years ago, I was standing on a velvet pedestal in a cramped, overly perfumed bridal boutique downtown. The heavy silk of my wedding dress cascaded around me in a pool of ivory. It was the evening before my wedding day. The shop was closed to the public, the owner having stayed late just for my final fitting. I was exhausted, stressed about seating charts and anxious about the weather forecast, but beneath it all, I was profoundly happy. Or at least I thought I was. The scent of lavender and freshly steamed tulle hung thick in the air, masking the underlying smell of old dust in the historic building. I remember shifting my weight from one foot to the other, feeling the delicate lace bodice pinch slightly against my ribs. I had been planning this day for over a year. Every detail had been meticulously arranged, every vendor paid, every RSVP logged in a massive spreadsheet. I believed I was standing on the precipice of my happily ever after. My phone had buzzed in my purse, which was sitting on a velvet ottoman a few feet away. I asked the seamstress to pause her pinning so I could check it, assuming it was Derek confirming the timeline for the rehearsal dinner. He was supposed to be picking up his tuxedo from the tailor across town. I stepped off the pedestal, the heavy fabric rustling against the hardwood floor, and pulled the phone from my bag. It was a text from Derek. It was not about the rehearsal dinner or the tuxedo. It was exactly 3 lines long. "I cannot do this, Lauren. I am leaving with Vanessa. Do not try to find us." I stared at the glowing screen until the letters blurred into meaningless shapes. My brain refused to process the syntax. Leaving with Vanessa. Vanessa, my best friend since freshman year of college. Vanessa, who had held my hair back when I was sick, who knew all my deepest insecurities, who was supposed to be standing right next to me tomorrow in a blush pink bridesmaid gown. We had spent countless hours sitting on the floor of my apartment, drinking cheap wine, and talking about our futures. She had helped me pick out the very dress I was wearing, dabbing away fake tears, and telling me how beautiful I looked. Every smile, every word of encouragement, every shared secret had been a calculated performance while she was sleeping with the man I loved. The air in the boutique vanished. The heavy silk of the wedding gown suddenly felt like a straitjacket restricting my lungs, crushing my ribs. I could not breathe. I tried to dial Derek's number, my fingers slipping clumsily over the glass screen. It went straight to voicemail. I called Vanessa, straight to voicemail. A cold dread began to seep into my bones, replacing the initial shock with a sickening realization. Vanessa had been overly involved in the financial logistics of the wedding. She had insisted on handling all the joint funds for the bridal party, collecting the cash for the dresses, the bachelorette trip, and the hair and makeup artists. She claimed it was her gift to me, a way to alleviate my stress during the final weeks of planning. I had blindly trusted her, handing over envelopes of cash collected from my cousins and college friends. I opened my banking app on my phone, my hands shaking violently. The shared account I had set up specifically for the bridesmaid expenses, which Vanessa had full access to, showed a balance of exactly $0. She had drained it. Every single cent. They had not just run away together. They had financed their escape using the money my family and friends had contributed. The betrayal layered over the heartbreak was suffocating. She was not just a woman who stole my fiancé. She was a calculated thief who had used my trust to fund her betrayal. The seamstress, noticing my sudden pallor and the way my hands were trembling, rushed over her face lined with deep concern. She reached out to steady me. "Are you all right, honey? You look like you are going to faint." I could not speak. The words were trapped in my throat, blocked by a rising tide of panic and humiliation. I just shook my head frantically, backing out of the dress as she hurriedly unzipped the delicate back panel. I threw on my street clothes with clumsy, uncoordinated movements, my fingers struggling with the simple buttons on my blouse. I left the ivory gown in a crumpled heap on the floor, the heavy silk pooling like a discarded second skin. I ran out of the boutique without offering a single word of explanation to the bewildered seamstress. I practically threw myself into my car and drove straight to our shared apartment, breaking several traffic laws in my desperation to prove the text message wrong. I needed to see his clothes in the closet. I needed to see his toothbrush by the sink. I needed this to be a cruel, elaborate joke. But when I unlocked the front door, the apartment was eerily silent. The living room was perfectly neat, untouched. I rushed down the hallway to the bedroom. Derek's closet was entirely empty. The expensive leather suitcase my parents had bought him for his birthday was missing. Half the bathroom toiletries were gone. His favorite watches, his collection of shoes, all vanished. I collapsed onto the edge of the mattress, the reality of the betrayal slamming into me like a physical blow. They were gone. My best friend and the man I was supposed to marry had abandoned me, leaving me alone in an empty apartment on the eve of my wedding. I was perfectly and entirely alone. But the emotional devastation was only the first wave. The second wave, the one that would threaten to drown me completely, arrived an hour later when I finally forced myself to move from the edge of that empty bed. I walked into the living room, my legs feeling like they were made of solid lead, and opened my laptop. It was sitting on the dining table right next to a massive stack of meticulously assembled wedding favors I had spent 3 exhausting weekends tying tiny silk ribbons around. I needed to see the full extent of the damage. I logged into our joint banking portal, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I clicked on the savings account, the one where we had carefully deposited a significant portion of our paychecks for the last 2 years to pay the final vendor balances. The screen loaded, and the number staring back at me was an absolute zero. A sharp metallic taste flooded the back of my throat. I refreshed the page desperately, convincing myself it was a technical glitch, a server error, a temporary delay in the banking application. The screen reloaded. The balance remained zero. Derek had transferred every single dollar out of our shared savings account earlier that afternoon. My breathing turned shallow and rapid. I frantically clicked over to our joint checking account. Zero. He had completely wiped us out. He had taken the money meant for the florist, the photographer, the venue, and the caterer. He had taken my half of the rent money. Panic, cold and sharp, began to claw its way up my chest. I opened a new tab and logged into the credit card account we had opened specifically for the wedding expenses. I had agreed to put the card entirely in my name because Derek had claimed his credit score was taking a hit from an old student loan error he was supposedly fixing. I had trusted him blindly, assuming we were building a secure life together as equal partners. The dashboard loaded, displaying a glaring red warning banner across the top. The card was maxed out. The outstanding balance was exactly $40,000. I stared at the numbers until they blurred. $40,000. I clicked on the recent transactions. The charges were staggering and horrifyingly clear. First-class plane tickets to Paris. A massive charge at a luxury resort on the Amalfi Coast. $2,000 at a high-end designer boutique. Derek and Vanessa had not just stolen the wedding funds to run away. They had financed an extravagant month-long European vacation using a credit card tied exclusively to my social security number. They had stolen my money to celebrate their betrayal, leaving the entire debt squarely on my shoulders. I was 26 years old. I was a mid-level financial analyst making a modest salary that barely covered my half of our city rent and my own student loans. I did not have $40,000. I did not have a wealthy family to bail me out. My parents had passed away during my sophomore year of college, leaving me with nothing but a few boxes of photographs and the absolute necessity to fend for myself. I was entirely self-made, scraping by on scholarships and sheer willpower. Derek knew this. Vanessa knew this. They both knew exactly how vulnerable my financial situation was, and they had chosen to exploit it with ruthless precision. Suddenly, my cell phone rang, shattering the suffocating silence of the apartment. I jumped, my eyes darting to the screen. It was not Derek. It was a local number I recognized immediately. It was the events coordinator for our wedding venue. I answered with a trembling hand, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice sounding incredibly small. "Hi, Lauren," the coordinator said, her tone bright and cheerful, a stark contrast to the absolute nightmare I was living. "I am so sorry to bother you the night before the big day, but I am reviewing the final checklist. We still have not received the final cashier check for the catering and the bar service. Derek mentioned he would drop it off this afternoon, but we have not seen him. We need that payment cleared before the staff begins setting up the tables tomorrow morning." The room started to spin. The walls of the apartment seemed to close in on me, pressing the air out of my lungs. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to force my brain to formulate a coherent response. The catering bill alone was thousands of dollars. The money was gone. The wedding was gone. The man I loved was gone. "There is not going to be a wedding," I choked out, the words tearing at my throat. The cheerful demeanor on the other end of the line vanished instantly. "Excuse me, Lauren, did you say the wedding is canceled?" "Yes, I said, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down my cheek. The wedding is cancelled. I do not have the money. He took the money. He left. Please just cancel everything. I hung up the phone before she could respond, before I had to hear the pity in her voice, or the inevitable discussion about cancellation fees and non-refundable deposits. I let the phone drop from my hand, watching it clatter onto the hardwood floor. I sank to my knees, surrounded by the physical evidence of a future that had just been violently erased. The seating charts, the customized napkins, the expensive invitations we had spent hours addressing. It was all garbage now. The financial ruin loomed over me like a tidal wave. $40,000 in high-interest credit card debt. A broken lease on an apartment I could no longer afford on a single income. The impending calls from angry vendors demanding their final payments. At 26, my credit score was about to be obliterated. My savings were non-existent. I was facing a level of financial devastation that took people decades to recover from. The sheer magnitude of the betrayal was paralyzing. Derek and Vanessa had not just broken my heart. They had actively, maliciously conspired to destroy my financial future. They had turned my trust into a weapon and used it to execute a perfect, devastating strike against my independence. I curled into a ball on the floor, gasping for air as a full-blown panic attack seized my body. I was drowning in debt, suffocating in betrayal, and completely, utterly alone in the wreckage of my own life, wondering how I could possibly survive the morning. The cold hardwood floor offered no comfort as I lay there gasping for air in the wreckage of my shattered future. For several agonizing minutes, I let the panic completely consume me. I was drowning in the sheer terror of financial ruin, my mind spinning with images of bankruptcy and eviction. But as the clock on the microwave glared back at me, its digital numbers glowing a harsh green in the dim apartment, a tiny resilient spark ignited deep within my chest. I could not afford to fall apart. I had no parents to run to, no childhood bedroom to hide in, and no trust fund to magically erase this nightmare. I had only myself. My first instinct was to call my older sister Olivia, but Olivia had just given birth to her first child 3 weeks ago. She was exhausted, overwhelmed, and in no position to handle the chaotic implosion of my life. I needed someone who could look at this disaster objectively. I needed someone who understood crisis management, high-stakes pressure, and ruthless strategy. I needed Jamal. Jamal was Olivia's husband, an African-American man whose brilliant legal mind had propelled him to the position of senior partner at one of the most aggressive corporate law firms in the state. He was a force of nature in the courtroom, known for dismantling opponents with clinical precision. Beneath his sharp suits and intimidating professional reputation, he was fiercely protective of his family. My fingers trembled as I picked up my discarded phone and dialed his number. He answered on the second ring. Lauren Jamal, said, his deep voice thick with sleep but immediately alert. The rehearsal dinner is not for another 3 hours. Tell me you are not stressing about the seating chart again. Jamal. I croaked, the sound of my own voice shattering the last remaining dam, holding back my tears. A violent sob ripped through my chest, harsh and guttural. He is gone. He took everything. Jamal. I have a $40,000 debt in my name, and the accounts are entirely empty. He left with Vanessa. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute and terrifying. The jovial, teasing brother-in-law vanished instantly, replaced by the surgical, cold-blooded attorney who destroyed corporate empires before breakfast. I am leaving the house right now, Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave, radiating absolute authority. Listen to me very carefully, Lauren. Do not answer any calls from vendors. Do not text Derek. Do not text Vanessa. Do not log into any more accounts. Put the laptop down and do not touch anything else. I will be at your apartment in exactly 15 minutes. Those 15 minutes felt like an eternity suspended in a vacuum. I sat on the floor of the empty bedroom, staring at the indentation Derek's suitcase had left on the carpet. I had been foolish. I had trusted blindly, handing over financial access and emotional security to two people who had viewed me not as a partner or a friend, but as an asset to be extracted and discarded. By the time Jamal's heavy, authoritative knock sounded at the front door, The hysterical weeping of a jilted bride had burned itself out. I opened the door. Jamal swept into the apartment still wearing his sweatpants and a university hoodie, but carrying his leather briefcase like a shield. He took one look at my tear-stained face, and the discarded wedding favors on the table pulled me into a brief, crushing hug, and then immediately shifted into battle mode. "Sit down," he commanded, opening his laptop and placing it on the dining table. "Give me your phone. Give me every single login for every account that has your name attached to it." For the next 4 hours, Jamal turned my dining room into a war room. He was a machine moving with a calculated speed that left me in awe. He immediately contacted the credit card company's fraud department. Because Derek and Vanessa were not authorized users on the specific card they used for their European vacation, Jamal aggressively argued that the charges were fraudulent. He threatened immediate legal action against the bank if they did not freeze the account and launch a formal investigation into the unauthorized overseas transactions. Next, he systematically locked down my social security number, placed hard freezes on my credit reports across all major bureaus, and revoked Derek's access to the apartment portal. When the venue coordinator tried calling back, Jamal answered my phone. He deployed a stream of legalese so intimidating and complex that the coordinator immediately backed down, agreeing to halt all setup and direct any future correspondence exclusively to his law firm. He isolated the damage. He built a legal firewall around my remaining assets, ensuring that Derek could not extract another single dime from my name. By the time the sun began to rise, casting a pale gray light over the city, the immediate bleeding had been stopped. The $40,000 debt was now locked in a fierce legal dispute, buying me crucial time. The vendors were legally barred from harassing me. Jamal closed his laptop and looked at me, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of sympathy and intense pride. "You survived the night, Lauren. Now we plan for the rest of your life." I walked into the bathroom and stared at my reflection in the mirror. My eyes were red and swollen, my skin pale and blotchy. I looked like a victim. I looked like a girl who had been broken. I turned on the cold water and splashed it over my face, washing away the remnants of my ruined wedding day. I grabbed a towel and dried my skin, watching my reflection change. The fear was gone. The sorrow had evaporated. In their place was a hard, impenetrable core of pure survival instinct. Derek and Vanessa thought they had destroyed me. They thought I would crumble, declare bankruptcy, and fade into a pathetic, miserable existence. They had underestimated me completely. I looked at my reflection and made a silent, unbreakable vow. I would not cry another tear over a man who was nothing more than a parasite. I would not mourn a friend who was nothing more than a thief. I was going to climb the corporate ladder with a ruthlessness that would terrify them. I was going to become so immensely, untouchably successful that my very existence would become their greatest punishment. I would amass wealth, power, and influence. And one day, when they least expected it, karma would arrive. I walked out of the bathroom, my spine straight, ready to build my empire. The transition from a devastated bride to a corporate machine did not happen overnight, but it started that very Monday. I walked into my mid-level financial analyst job wearing a sharply tailored suit I had bought from a consignment shop and a demeanor so cold it made my supervisor hesitate before speaking to me. The pitying looks from coworkers who had been invited to the canceled wedding bounced off my newfound armor. I did not entertain their hushed questions. I did not accept their sympathetic coffee offers. I simply sat at my desk, opened my spreadsheets, and began the relentless, exhausting process of working myself to the bone. My entry into the mergers and acquisitions sector was entirely strategic. The entire sector was the most cutthroat, high-stakes division in the financial world. It was a vicious, male-dominated arena where weakness was instantly punished and burnout was treated as a badge of honor. That was exactly where I needed to be. I needed an environment that would consume every waking hour of my existence, leaving me no time to mourn a phantom future. I volunteered for every complex valuation model, every grueling due diligence process, and every weekend assignment that my senior colleagues eagerly passed off. 80-hour work weeks became my baseline. My life was reduced to a brutal, repetitive cycle. I would wake up at 4 in the morning, hit the gym to burn off the residual anxiety, and be at my desk before the sun rose. I survived on black coffee protein bars and a simmering, unquenchable rage that burned deep in my chest. While my peers were out networking at upscale bars or complaining about work-life balance, I was buried in financial statements, analyzing corporate vulnerabilities, and learning how to dismantle companies from the inside out. The debt was a constant, suffocating weight. Jamal had fought brilliantly, managing to force the credit card company to freeze the $40,000 fraud and eventually launching a civil suit against Derek. But the legal process was agonizingly slow, and I still had to survive the immediate fallout. I had my own student loans, a broken lease penalty from the apartment I could no longer afford, and the heavy legal fees required to keep the debt collectors at bay. I moved into a tiny, windowless studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. I sold everything of value I owned, from my car to the modest jewelry my parents had left me. Every single dollar I earned went toward financial survival. I tracked my expenses with the same ruthless precision I applied to corporate acquisitions. Paying off those initial debts dollar by agonizing dollar taught me the true value of leverage. I watched my bank account slowly creep from the negative back into the black, and with every milestone, my ambition grew sharper. I was not just digging myself out of a hole. I built a new fortress. Within 2 years, my relentless grind began to yield undeniable results. I was promoted to senior associate, bypassing two male colleagues who had been at the firm a decade longer than I had. I earned a reputation for being an absolute shark on the negotiating table. I possessed a unique ability to read people, to spot the exact moment a CEO realized their company was overvalued, to identify the hidden liabilities in a merger that everyone else missed. I used the trauma of my betrayal as a lens. Having seen firsthand how easily people could lie and conceal their true motives, I never took a corporate projection at face value. I dug until I found the rot. By my 30th birthday, the grueling hours and ruthless negotiations paid off in a spectacular fashion. I was poached by a massive tech investment conglomerate and given the title of Mergers and Acquisitions Director. My salary quadrupled overnight. The windowless studio was replaced by a sleek, minimalist penthouse overlooking the city skyline. The consignment shop suits were swapped for custom-tailored pieces from Milan. I had achieved the financial security I craved, but the hunger inside me remained entirely unsated. I became known in the industry as a closer, a woman devoid of sentimentality who could orchestrate a $100 million acquisition without breaking a sweat. I fired incompetent executives without a second thought. I restructured failing companies with a surgical precision that left older, seasoned board members in awe. The fragile, trusting girl who had begged a wedding coordinator to cancel a catering order was completely dead, replaced by a formidable executive who dictated terms and crushed opposition. Yet amidst the wealth and growing influence, my personal life remained a heavily guarded fortress. I attended corporate galas alone. I never dated. I kept my digital footprint completely erased. There were no social media profiles, no vacation photos, no breadcrumbs for anyone from my past to follow. To the outside world, I was a ghost who only materialized in boardrooms to finalize massive corporate takeovers. I wanted Derek and Vanessa to believe their betrayal had ruined me, that I had faded into obscurity, just as they probably hoped. The total isolation was a highly deliberate and calculated choice. I refused to let anyone close enough to inflict that kind of damage again. My inner circle consisted solely of my sister Olivia, my brother-in-law Jamal, and the select few corporate allies I deemed useful. Every single waking moment was fully dedicated to the climb. The higher I went, the more power I accumulated, and the closer I got to the ultimate goal. I was playing a long game, waiting for the perfect, inevitable moment when the universe would align and present me with the opportunity to collect the debt they truly owed me. The 80-hour weeks, the endless financial models, the agonizing climb up the corporate ladder were all just preparation. I was sharpening my knives in the dark, waiting for the exact day I could finally use them. Becoming a ghost requires intense discipline. It is not simply a matter of deleting old social media accounts or changing a phone number. It is a systematic, relentless scrubbing of your entire existence from the public domain. I hired a specialized cybersecurity firm to scrub my name from data brokers' search engines and university alumni directories. If you searched for Lauren, the girl who was left at the altar, you found absolutely nothing. I legally changed my middle name, utilized corporate shell companies for my property purchases, and ensured my face never appeared in our investment conglomerate marketing materials. I became a phantom. In the hyper-connected modern corporate world, this level of anonymity was often viewed with suspicion, but I weaponized it. It made me unpredictable. Competitors could not read my history, and more importantly, the people from my past could not track my trajectory. To Derek and Vanessa, I was a casualty they had left behind in the dirt. A pathetic memory they probably only recalled when they needed a good laugh to boost their own egos. I wanted them to believe I had faded into the miserable background of life. But while they had no idea where I was or what I had become, I knew exactly what they were doing. My brother-in-law Jamal possessed a network of private investigators and financial analysts who were exceptionally skilled at quiet surveillance. Every quarter, like clockwork, Jamal would slide a heavy manila folder across my mahogany dining table. We treated it as a grim ritual, a quiet reminder of why I worked so hard. Inside those folders was the meticulously documented reality of Derek and Vanessa. They had married 2 years after they destroyed my life. The wedding was a lavish, over-the-top spectacle heavily featured on Vanessa's newly minted lifestyle blog. They posed on a cliffside in Santorini sipping champagne and staring into each other, eyes projecting the ultimate image of a triumphant, wealthy power couple. They sold their love story as destiny, a beautiful tragedy, where they just had to follow their hearts regardless of the collateral damage. It was a complete and utter fraud. The financial dossiers Jamal compiled revealed a terrifying house of cards. Derek had managed to land a branch manager position at a mid-tier technology firm, a job that paid well, but nowhere near enough to support the lifestyle they broadcasted to their thousands of online followers. Vanessa had opened a chain of high-end fashion boutiques, leveraging Derek's salary and massive small business loans to sign leases in prime commercial real estate districts. On the surface, they were winning. Vanessa posted daily updates wearing designer clothes, driving a heavily financed, luxury sports utility vehicle, and hosting extravagant dinner parties in their leased suburban mansion. They were desperate to prove to the world, and perhaps to themselves, that their betrayal was justified by their undeniable success. They needed the audience to validate their cruel choices. The reality laid bare in black and white spreadsheet columns was beautiful in its absolute wretchedness. Their debt-to-income ratio was astronomical. Derek was drowning in high-interest personal loans he had taken out to cover the boutique operating losses. Vanessa inventory was purchased entirely on revolving credit. They were constantly shuffling money between accounts, opening new lines of credit to pay off the minimum balances of the old ones. Every smile they posted online was financed by money they did not actually have. They were slaves to an illusion, trapped in a desperate performance of wealth that was slowly suffocating them. They thought they had upgraded, but they had simply built a golden cage of compound interest and impending bankruptcy. The $40,000 debt they had dumped on me years ago was pocket change compared to the financial crater they had dug for themselves. The contrast between their frantic debt-fueled performance and my own quiet, untouchable reality was staggering. While Vanessa was staging photo shoots with handbags she could not afford, I was quietly purchasing commercial real estate through anonymous trusts. While Derek was sweating over his monthly car lease payments, I was directing billion-dollar acquisitions and earning bonuses that exceeded his entire lifetime earning potential. My wealth was not for show. It was cold, hard, liquid power. I owned my penthouse outright. My investment portfolios were diversified, aggressive, and incredibly lucrative. I did not need validation from strangers on the internet. I found my validation in the terrified silence of boardrooms when I dismantled a hostile takeover bid. I found it in the absolute security of knowing I would never depend on another human being for my survival again. My power was quiet, but it was absolute. I watched their struggles from my ivory tower, feeling a cold, clinical satisfaction. Jamal would occasionally ask if I wanted to intervene to perhaps anonymously buy their debt and crush them instantly. It would have been so easy. A single phone call to the right collection agency, a quick maneuver with the commercial landlords, and I could have rendered them homeless in a matter of weeks. But I always declined. Quick vengeance was cheap. It lacked poetry. I did not just want them to lose their money. I wanted them to lose their pride, their false narrative, and the very foundation of the arrogant delusion they had built upon my suffering. I wanted the collapse to be public, humiliating, and entirely inescapable. So I let them continue. I let them dig the hole deeper. I let Vanessa sign another disastrous commercial lease. I let Derek leverage his remaining equity to buy another depreciating luxury vehicle. I remained in the shadows, the invisible architect of their impending doom. They were living on borrowed time, completely unaware that the ghost of the woman they had destroyed was now the entity holding the mortgage on their entire fake existence. I was not just surviving anymore. I was waiting for the exact moment the trap would spring shut. The exact moment the trap would spring shut was always in the back of my mind, but my laser focus on professional dominance eventually brought me face to face with the only force capable of disrupting my carefully orchestrated isolation. The perfect distraction from my quiet surveillance arrived in the form of a hostile takeover. My conglomerate was targeting a massive cloud computing firm. The deal was valued at nearly $2 billion, and I was leading the acquisition team. We had spent 4 grueling months mapping out every vulnerability, every hidden liability, and every bloated executive salary we intended to slash. The final negotiation was set for a Tuesday morning in a glass-walled boardroom overlooking the financial district. I walked in wearing a charcoal gray suit, armed with a binder full of financial forensics that would force their board to capitulate. I expected to obliterate their legal team before lunch. I did not expect Harrison Cole. Harrison was representing a rival investment syndicate that had secretly acquired a massive block of shares, essentially hijacking our takeover attempt. He was 36 at the time, already a billionaire, and possessing a reputation that mirrored my own. He was ruthless, calculating, and completely devoid of sentimentality in business. He sat at the opposite end of the mahogany table, exuding the relaxed confidence of an apex predator who already knew he had won. His legal team looked smug. My own team looked panicked. I just opened my binder. The meeting commenced, and it was an absolute bloodbath. Harrison attempted to dictate the terms, laying out a restructuring plan that heavily favored his syndicate. He spoke with a smooth, commanding baritone, completely dismissing my firm and our initial offer. When he finished, he leaned back in his leather chair and looked directly at me, expecting submission. Instead, I tore his entire proposal to shreds. I systematically dismantled his valuation model, exposing a glaring flaw in their projected revenue growth that his analysts had completely missed. I did not raise my voice. I did not show anger. I used cold, hard numbers to box him into a corner. I watched the smugness evaporate from his legal team. But Harrison did not look angry. He looked fascinated. For the next 4 hours, the rest of the room faded into background noise. It became a high-speed intellectual chess match between the two of us. Every trap he laid, I bypassed. Every aggressive counteroffer I made, he scrutinized and parried with lethal accuracy. We communicated in the highly specific language of corporate finance trading maneuvers with absolute precision. It was exhausting, exhilarating, and entirely unprecedented. I had never met a man who did not either try to patronize me or shrink away from my aggression. Harrison did neither. He met my intensity stride for stride, treating me not as a woman to be managed, but as a formidable adversary to be respected. By the time we finally hammered out a joint acquisition agreement that merged our syndicates, the sun was setting over the city skyline. As the room emptied, Harrison remained seated. He watched me pack my heavily annotated documents into my briefcase. He did not offer a sleazy compliment or a patronizing pat on the back. He simply said, "Your analysts missed the offshore tax liabilities in Section 4, but your countermeasure on the intellectual property rights was brilliant. You saved this deal from becoming a bureaucratic nightmare." I looked at him, recognizing a kindred spirit hiding behind a tailored suit. "Your revenue projections were an arrogant fiction," I replied smoothly. "But your restructuring timeline is highly efficient. I will have my team draft the final contracts by tomorrow morning." That brutal negotiation was the unexpected foundation of our entire relationship. Harrison did not ask me out on a traditional date. He invited me to review a distressed asset portfolio over black coffee at 5 in the morning. We bonded over profit margins, risk assessments, and a shared intolerance for incompetence. Our courtship was quiet, intense, and completely hidden from the public eye. There were no grand romantic gestures or public displays of affection. Instead, there was profound, unwavering mutual respect. We were two apex predators who had finally found someone they did not have to hold back around. Harrison never asked about my past, and I never volunteered the details of my humiliation. He understood that whoever I was before I became a corporate titan did not matter. He valued the woman standing in front of him, a woman who could dissect a financial statement faster than his best analysts and who never backed down from a fight. For the first time in my life, I felt entirely secure with a man. Not because he had money, but because he saw my intellect as an asset rather than a threat. He did not need to diminish me to feel powerful. We operated as absolute equals, a united front that terrified our competitors and multiplied our respective empires. Our romance was built on a foundation of absolute truth. We did not play games. We did not manipulate. The trauma of my past, the betrayal that had forged my heavy armor, slowly began to feel less like a gaping wound and more like a faded scar. Harrison did not heal me. I had already healed myself through grueling work and sheer determination. But Harrison gave me a reason to build a life beyond mere survival and vengeance. He showed me that a partnership could be a multiplier of strength rather than a draining liability. As we merged our lives with the same precision we use to merge corporations, I realized I had found the ultimate ally. My fortress was no longer a solitary confinement. It was an empire ruled by two. And with Harrison standing firmly by my side, I knew my impending strike against Derek and Vanessa would be absolutely devastating. Our wedding was the exact antithesis of the $40,000 nightmare Derek had abandoned me to 8 years prior. There were no embossed invitations, no sprawling guest lists, and absolutely no velvet pedestals or overpriced silk gowns. Harrison and I drove to a private coastal estate he owned just outside the city limits. We wore tailored suits. We did not need an audience to validate our commitment. We only needed each other and the very few people who had proven their absolute loyalty when I was at my lowest point. My sister Olivia stood beside me, radiating a quiet, fierce pride. She had watched me claw my way out of financial ruin, and now she was watching me merge my life with an equal. Beside her stood Jamal. My brilliant brother-in-law had been the one to pull me from the wreckage of my apartment all those years ago. Now this towering, impeccably dressed African-American legal shark stood as the official witness to the most powerful merger of my life. The ceremony was short, legally binding, and deeply profound. We drank a single bottle of vintage champagne on the terrace overlooking the crashing waves. It was the cementing of an unbreakable alliance. That afternoon on the terrace solidified what I had come to call my chosen family. I had learned the hard way that proximity and shared history did not equal loyalty. Loyalty was forged in the trenches. Harrison understood this perfectly. He integrated seamlessly with Olivia and Jamal, recognizing instantly that they were not just my relatives, but my most trusted advisors. The synergy between Harrison and Jamal was particularly lethal. They were two men who operated at the absolute highest echelons of corporate power. Within months of our wedding, Jamal formally transitioned from his senior partnership at his old firm to become the chief legal officer for our newly combined investment conglomerate. Jamal became the master architect of our corporate empire. He structured the trusts, the shell companies, and the holding firms that kept our wealth entirely insulated from public scrutiny. When Harrison and I identified a target for acquisition, Jamal built the legal labyrinth that made our takeovers unstoppable. We were an impenetrable unit. Olivia provided the emotional grounding, running a highly successful philanthropic foundation funded by our acquisitions, while Jamal Harrison and I dominated the financial sector. We ate dinner together every Sunday. We celebrated every quarterly victory. We were a fortress, and no one from the outside could breach our walls. This fortress became infinitely more important 2 years later with the birth of our son Leo. Becoming a mother fundamentally altered the architecture of my ambition. When the nurse placed Leo in my arms for the very first time, a profound, terrifying wave of protective instinct washed over me. I looked down at his dark hair and his tiny hands, and I realized that my empire was no longer just a monument to my survival. It was his legacy. Harrison proved to be as dedicated a father as he was a CEO. The man who ruthlessly dismantled tech monopolies would happily spend his evenings sitting on the floor of our penthouse, assembling intricate wooden train sets. He shifted his grueling travel schedule, ensuring he was home for bedtime reading, never allowing our corporate responsibilities to eclipse our family. Seeing Harrison with Leo healed a part of me I did not even know was still bruised. It showed me what true partnership looked like, in practice, stripping away the lingering shadows of my past betrayal. Leo grew into a bright child who absorbed the energy of our household. He spent his weekends riding on Jamal's shoulders and helping Olivia bake in her sprawling kitchen. He was surrounded by a chosen family that loved him fiercely and protected him absolutely. He did not know about the cruelty of the world yet, and I was determined to ensure he would only ever face it from a position of absolute strength. Everything Harrison and I built, every company we acquired, every real estate portfolio we expanded, was structured to guarantee Leo an untouchable future. As Leo approached his 5th birthday, our conglomerate reached unprecedented heights. We were untouchable. My net worth was a figure that would have made the 26-year-old version of myself pass out from shock. But the wealth was secondary to the security. I had constructed a reality where no one could ever pull the rug out from under me again. I held all the cards. I controlled the board. I was the master of my own fate. And yet the meticulous surveillance file Jamal updated every quarter remained in my desk drawer. Derek and Vanessa were still out there drowning in their pathetic, fabricated lives, completely oblivious to the predator circling their sinking ship. Having Leo only sharpened my resolve. I wanted to eradicate the very concept of people like Derek and Vanessa. I wanted to ensure that the kind of malicious, opportunistic betrayal they specialized in was met with a consequence so severe it would leave a permanent scar on their existence. My chosen family was my shield, but my past trauma remained my sword. The peace and happiness I found with Harrison, Leo, Olivia, and Jamal did not dilute my desire for retribution. If anything, experiencing true loyalty only highlighted the absolute depravity of what Derek and Vanessa had done. They had stolen from me, humiliated me, and left me for dead. I had risen from those ashes, built an impenetrable kingdom, and surrounded myself with titans. The waiting game was finally coming to an end. The pieces were all perfectly aligned on the board. All I needed now was the right bait to draw them out of their miserable little lives and directly into the crosshairs of my perfectly constructed corporate guillotine. The opportunity to drop the blade of that corporate guillotine presented itself on a rainy Tuesday morning. It did not arrive with a dramatic flourish or a blaring siren. It arrived in a thick, cream-colored envelope tucked neatly between a quarterly earnings report and a charity gala invitation on my mahogany desk. I picked up the envelope, noting the gold-embossed seal of my former university. Inside was a heavy cardstock invitation to our 10-year college reunion. The University Alumni Association had finally managed to track down my corporate address, piercing through the thick layer of anonymity I had paid good money to maintain. I read the elegant cursive script detailing the upcoming ballroom gala, the ticket prices, and the promise of a nostalgic evening reconnecting with old friends. I felt absolutely nothing. Nostalgia was a useless emotion, a comforting lie people told themselves when their present reality was disappointing. My present reality was a multi-billion-dollar empire. I had no desire to drink cheap wine and exchange forced pleasantries with people who had either pitied me or laughed at me a decade ago. Without a second thought, I tossed the gold-embossed invitation directly into the shredder bin beneath my desk and turned my attention back to the massive acquisition portfolio waiting on my monitor. I forgot about the reunion entirely until Sunday evening. Harrison and I were hosting our usual family dinner at the penthouse. Leo was asleep in his room, exhausted from spending the entire afternoon building a towering block city with his father. Jamal and Olivia had stayed behind for a glass of vintage scotch. While Olivia relaxed on the velvet sofa, Jamal walked over to the kitchen island, placing a thick leather-bound dossier on the marble surface. This was not his usual quarterly update on our personal assets. Jamal had a specific predatory gleam in his dark eyes, the exact look he got right before dismantling an opposing legal team in court. I pulled the financial disclosures for the Apex Solutions acquisition, Jamal said, his deep voice carrying a note of dangerous amusement. Harrison walked over, handing me a glass of scotch before leaning against the counter. Apex Solutions was a mid-tier regional technology firm we had been aggressively targeting for a hostile takeover. They had decent proprietary software, but their management was grossly incompetent. The company was bleeding capital, drowning in operational inefficiencies, and desperately seeking a buyout to avoid filing for bankruptcy. As the mergers and acquisitions director, it was my job to execute the takeover, liquidate their useless assets, and absorb their tech into our conglomerate. I reviewed the disclosures yesterday, I said, taking a sip of my drink. Their regional branches are a financial disaster. I am planning to dissolve at least 3 of them immediately upon acquisition. The severance packages will be minimal. Jamal tapped the leather folder with a heavy gold pen. You are going to want to dissolve their Pacific Northwest branch personally, Lauren. I ran a full background check on their executive roster to identify potential legal liabilities before we finalized the hostile bid. Look at the regional director for that specific branch. I set my glass down and opened the dossier. Jamal had highlighted a single name on the organizational chart: Derek, my ex-fiancé. The man who had drained my bank accounts, humiliated me on the eve of my wedding, and stolen $40,000 was the regional director of the exact failing branch I was preparing to liquidate. I stared at the name printed in stark black ink. The sheer magnitude of the coincidence was staggering. In a country of millions, in a corporate landscape spanning endless sectors, Derek had managed to tie his entire fraudulent, debt-ridden lifestyle to a company that was currently sitting squarely in my crosshairs. Jamal leaned forward, resting his hands on the marble island. Derek makes a low 6-figure salary, but his performance metrics are abysmal. He has been surviving at Apex Solutions purely by pushing off debts and falsifying growth projections. Sound familiar? He is terrified of this acquisition. If Apex goes under, or if the new parent company fires him, his entire house of cards collapses. He cannot afford his leased mansion. Vanessa cannot afford the commercial rent for her failing boutiques. They will be bankrupt within 30 days of his termination. Harrison looked at the dossier, a slow, dark smile spreading across his face. He wrapped his arm around my waist, his presence a solid anchor of power. It seems your past has just walked directly onto our chopping block, my love. How do you want to handle the execution? My mind raced, processing the incredible leverage I now held. Derek was completely at my mercy. I held the power to destroy his career, repossess his lifestyle, and push him into financial ruin with a single stroke of my pen. He had absolutely no idea that the faceless corporate conglomerate preparing to swallow his company whole was directed by the woman he had discarded like trash. He thought he was untouchable. He thought his upgrade with Vanessa was secure. I closed the folder. The silence in the kitchen was heavy with anticipation. Jamal and Harrison were watching me, waiting for the order to strike. Suddenly, the memory of that gold-embossed envelope flashed in my mind. The 10-year college reunion. The event was scheduled for the exact same week the Apex Solutions acquisition was set to be finalized and publicly announced. Derek would undoubtedly attend the reunion to flaunt his fake wealth, to project an image of success, and to network desperately in hopes of finding a lifeline before his branch was axed. I walked out of the kitchen, crossed the penthouse to my home office, and retrieved the shredded pieces of the reunion invitation from the bin. I walked back and dropped the torn heavy cardstock onto the marble island. "Jamal," I said, my voice cold and precise. "Draft the final acquisition paperwork for Apex Solutions. Make sure the Pacific Northwest branch is entirely isolated for immediate liquidation. I want no severance packages offered. Harrison freeze any external hiring within our network so he cannot jump ship to a competitor." Harrison kissed my temple. "Consider it done. What about the reunion?" I looked at the torn invitation. "I am going to RSVP. Derek and Vanessa have spent the last 8 years believing they won. They need an audience to validate their illusions. I am going to give them exactly what they want. I will attend the reunion. I will let them mock me. I will let them dig their own graves in front of everyone they want to impress. And then I am going to drop the anvil." Jamal let out a deep, booming laugh that echoed through the penthouse. "It is a beautiful trap, Lauren. They will never see it coming." The plan was set. I was not just going to fire Derek. I was going to humiliate him on the exact same scale he had humiliated me. I was going to strip away his arrogant facade in front of his peers, expose his financial ruin, and watch him realize that the woman he called a nobody was actually the god of his fragile universe. I poured myself another measure of scotch, the anticipation burning bright and hot in my veins. The ghost was finally coming out of the shadows. The following morning, the atmosphere in my executive office crackled with a distinct predatory energy. The decision to attend the reunion had shifted my focus from a standard corporate acquisition to a highly personalized surgical strike. I arrived at the conglomerate headquarters before the sun had even crested the city skyline, bypassing the usual morning briefings to lock myself inside my suite. I needed to dissect every single variable of the trap we were setting. Derek was already neatly packaged for slaughter on the corporate chopping block, but a hostile takeover of his tech branch was only half the equation. To truly dismantle the illusion they had built over the last 8 years, I needed to obliterate Vanessa entirely. I sat behind my desk, booting up my secure terminal as Jamal walked through the double-glass doors. He carried 2 massive cups of black coffee and a secondary leather-bound folder much thicker than the one he had presented at the penthouse the night before. He placed the coffee in front of me and dropped the folder with a heavy, satisfying thud. "We handled Derek last night," Jamal said, pulling up a chair and unbuttoning his suit jacket. "But I promised you a complete forensic breakdown of their combined liabilities. If you want to burn their kingdom to the ground, you need to see exactly what Vanessa has been doing with her boutique chain." I opened the folder. The first page was a master summary of Vanessa business entity. She operated 3 high-end fashion boutiques located in prime commercial retail districts across the state. For years, she had weaponized these stores on social media, posting heavily filtered photos of herself sipping champagne in front of her branded storefronts. She sold the image of a fiercely independent, successful entrepreneur who had built a fashion empire from scratch. I flipped to the financial disclosures, and the reality was absolutely pathetic. The boutiques were hemorrhaging cash at an alarming rate. Vanessa was a deeply incompetent manager, running a vanity project fueled entirely by catastrophic debt. Her profit margins were negative, and her inventory turnover rate was dismal. "Look at the commercial lease agreements," Jamal instructed, tapping a manicured finger against the dossier. "Specifically, look at the property management holding companies she makes her monthly rent payments to." I turned the page, my eyes scanning the dense legal jargon of her commercial leases. The addresses of her 3 boutiques were listed clearly. 2 were located in upscale outdoor shopping promenades, and the flagship store was situated in a highly coveted downtown retail block. My gaze drifted to the lesser information. The properties were managed by a commercial real estate trust named Obsidian Holdings. A slow, cold chill washed over my skin as the realization clicked into place. Obsidian Holdings was not just a random corporate entity. It was one of the primary shell companies Jamal had structured for my personal real estate portfolio 3 years ago. I used it to acquire distressed commercial properties, renovate them, and lease them out to high-yield tenants. It was a completely anonymous trust, heavily insulated by layers of corporate privacy laws, ensuring my name never appeared on a single public tax record. I looked up at Jamal, my heart hammering a steady, triumphant rhythm against my ribs. I own the buildings. Jamal offered a slow, lethal smile that mirrored my own. You own the buildings, Lauren. You hold the master lease for every single square foot of retail space Vanessa operates. She has been wiring her exorbitant monthly rent directly into your private equity portfolio for the last 36 months. You are quite literally financing your own empire with the desperate borrowed cash she uses to maintain her fake lifestyle. The sheer absolute poetry of the situation was intoxicating. Vanessa had stolen my bridesmaid funds to finance her betrayal, and now, 8 years later, she was unknowingly paying me a massive monthly premium just to keep her fraudulent business afloat. But the poetry was about to turn into a nightmare. I looked back down at the ledger. There was a glaring column of numbers highlighted in red ink. She is in default, I stated, tracing the figures with my pen. She has missed the last 4 rent payments on the flagship location and is 60 days behind on the other 2 properties. Exactly, Jamal confirmed, leaning back in his chair. The property management firm working under Obsidian Holdings has been sending her standard delinquency notices. They were preparing to initiate standard eviction protocols next week. I intervened and placed a hard freeze on all collection actions regarding her specific company. I wanted you to see this before the management firm pulled the trigger. I stared at the red numbers, the exact mechanism of her destruction laid bare in front of me. If a commercial tenant defaulted on their lease, the landlord possessed the right to lock the doors, seize the remaining inventory, and sue for the entire remaining balance of the lease term. Vanessa was entirely at my mercy. I could render her bankrupt and lock her out of her own stores with a single phone call. The dominoes were perfectly set, in a flawless, inescapable line. Derek was about to lose his job, his income, and his professional reputation in my hostile takeover. Simultaneously, Vanessa was about to lose her business, her inventory, and her storefronts to my eviction notice. They were entirely dependent on these 2 fragile pillars to uphold their arrogant, debt-fueled reality. And I held the sledgehammer that would smash both pillars at the exact same time. Do not let the property management firm send another warning, I instructed Jamal, my voice cold and resolute. Have our internal legal team draft the final eviction notices, the asset seizure warrants, and the lawsuit for the breached contract damages. But hold the paperwork, do not file it with the courts, and do not serve her. Jamal nodded, his legal mind already processing the timeline. You want to serve her after the reunion. I want to serve her the morning after the reunion, I corrected, closing the leather-bound folder with a sharp, decisive snap. I want them to walk into that ballroom feeling like royalty. I want them to look me in the eye, mock my plain clothes, and brag about their incredible success. I want them to reach the absolute highest peak of their arrogant delusion. Because when they wake up the next morning, Derek will receive his termination papers from my acquisition team, and Vanessa will find chains on the doors of her boutiques courtesy of my real estate trust. Jamal stood up, gathering the coffee cups. He looked down at me with profound respect. You are going to dismantle them so thoroughly, they will not even have ashes left to sweep up. As Jamal walked out of my office, I turned my chair to face the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. Below me, millions of people rushed through their day, completely oblivious to the financial warfare being waged in the towers above. Derek and Vanessa were somewhere out there, likely stressing over their credit card limits while picking out expensive outfits for the reunion. They thought they had won the game 8 years ago by breaking all the rules. They had no idea the game was already over. The ghost had stepped out of the shadows, locked the doors, and set the building on fire. The flames were invisible, but the heat was already rising. The remaining days of the week leading up to the 10-year college reunion required a master class in psychological compartmentalization. During the day, I directed my acquisition teams to finalize the lethal paperwork that would absorb Apex Solutions and liquidate their Pacific Northwest branch. At night, I sat in the quiet luxury of my penthouse, mentally rehearsing the impending execution. Harrison watched my preparation with a mixture of dark amusement and profound respect. He understood better than anyone the primal need to settle an outstanding debt. However, when I told him I intended to walk into the hotel ballroom completely alone, he initially pushed back. We were sitting in his private study on Thursday evening. Harrison poured 2 glasses of scotch and handed me one, his brow furrowed in a rare display of concern. "You do not have to face them by yourself, Lauren," he said, his deep voice echoing in the quiet room. "I can clear my schedule. I will walk in there with you and we can crush them together before the appetizers are even served." I smiled, taking a slow sip of the amber liquid. I knew Harrison wanted nothing more than to stand beside me and physically shield me from the people who had caused me such profound agony. But deploying a billionaire CEO as a shield was exactly what a weak person would do. "I need them to think I am weak." "Harrison," I explained, leaning back against the leather sofa, "if I walk in there on your arm dripping in diamonds and flanked by your personal security detail, they will immediately know they have lost. They will cower and apologize and play the victim. I do not want their apologies. I want their absolute, unadulterated arrogance. I want them to look at me and feel superior. I need them to dig the hole as deep as possible so that when the dirt finally caves in, they have absolutely no way out. You and Leo will make your entrance later. Let me set the stage first." Harrison slowly nodded, his eyes gleaming with a predatory understanding. He clinked his glass against mine, conceding to my strategy. The next phase of my preparation was entirely aesthetic. I needed a costume that projected failure or at least a very mundane middle-class mediocrity. This was the art of stealth wealth. The truly wealthy do not need to scream their net worth through massive logos or flashy accessories. They whisper it through flawless tailoring and exclusive fabrics that only the trained eye can recognize. Derek and Vanessa did not possess trained eyes. They were obsessed with the loud, desperate performance of wealth-heavily branded belts, leased luxury cars, and giant synthetic diamonds. They equated visible branding with actual success. I scheduled a private consultation with my personal stylist and gave her a very specific directive. I needed an outfit that a struggling mid-level manager would wear to a reunion to desperately prove she was doing fine. My stylist produced a navy blue sheath dress. It was entirely unbranded, lacking any visible logos or flashy hardware. To the untrained eye, it looked like something purchased off the rack at a mid-tier department store for maybe $200. In reality, it was a custom-tailored masterpiece woven from pure vicuna wool and silk created by an exclusive artisan in Milan. It fit me with absolute mathematical perfection, but it screamed ordinary. I applied this same philosophy to my accessories. I locked my actual engagement ring, a flawless 6-carat emerald-cut diamond, inside the biometric safe in my dressing room. Instead, I wore a simple, unadorned gold band. I carried a minimalist black leather clutch devoid of any interlocking designer logos. I wore absolutely no jewelry other than a pair of small pearl earrings. I instructed my makeup artist to create a look that was polished but tired, utilizing muted tones that made me look slightly overworked and profoundly unimpressive. I wanted to look exactly like the tragic jilted bride they expected to see. On the evening of the reunion, I stood in front of the full-length mirror in my dressing room, performing a final psychological check. I stared deeply into my own eyes, searching for any lingering trace of the terrified 26-year-old girl who had hyperventilated on the floor of an empty apartment. She was gone. The woman staring back at me was cold, calculating, and entirely untouchable. I was a corporate titan, masquerading as prey. The adrenaline coursing through my veins was a heavy, intoxicating narcotic. I was not walking into a reunion. I was walking into a slaughterhouse and I was holding all the locks. I bypassed my usual transportation. I instructed my driver to leave my customized armored sports utility vehicle in the underground garage. I certainly was not going to pull up to the reunion venue in a chauffeured $500,000 luxury tank. Instead, Jamal had quietly arranged for a standard mid-range sedan, a generic silver rental car that blended perfectly into the mundane traffic of the city. I grabbed the keys, descended into the garage, and drove myself into the downtown district. The drive was an exercise in absolute mental discipline. The rain-slicked streets reflected the neon lights of the financial district, the very buildings I owned and operated within. I thought about the sheer magnitude of the empire Jamal Harrison and I had built. As I navigated the traffic toward the Grand Hotel hosting the event, I visualized the legal documents currently sitting in Jamal's secure briefcase. The eviction notices, the termination papers, the financial ruin of the two people who had tried to bury me. My heartbeat remained steady, perfectly controlled. I pulled into the circular driveway of the venue, watching a parade of heavily leased luxury cars aggressively jockeying for position at the valet stand. It was a pathetic display of financial insecurity masked as success. I handed the keys of my generic silver rental car to the valet attendant, giving him a polite, subdued smile. I smoothed the invisible wrinkles from my navy blue dress, adjusted my plain black clutch, and walked through the revolving glass doors of the hotel. The grand lobby was already swarming with former classmates, their loud voices echoing off the marble walls. I took a deep breath, letting the cold air of the lobby fill my lungs. The game was officially on. I stepped onto the plush carpet and walked straight toward the ballroom, ready to let them mistake my silence for surrender. The grand ballroom was a chaotic symphony of clinking glassware and desperate networking. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over attendees, summarizing a decade of existence into 30-second elevator pitches. I glided through the perimeter, my customized navy dress moving with fluid grace. I declined a passing tray of hors d'oeuvres, opting for sparkling water from the bar. From my vantage point near a faux marble pillar, I had a tactical view. They positioned themselves directly in the center of the room. Derek and Vanessa were putting on a masterclass in fraudulent prosperity. Derek held court with mid-level recruiters, gesturing broadly to ensure his oversized luxury watch caught the light. I knew the watch was leased at an exorbitant interest rate. His flashy suit bunched at the shoulders, manifesting his immense financial strain. He looked tired beneath his artificial tan. There was a frantic energy in his laugh, the performance of a man praying to secure a new job before impending corporate slaughter. Vanessa was a tragic spectacle. Draped over Derek's arm, she wore a sequined emerald gown that screamed for validation. Her fingers were adorned with ostentatious rings, clutching a designer handbag I recognized instantly. It was a limited edition piece expensed to her boutique's revolving credit account just 3 weeks ago, pushing her closer to default. She tossed her head back, playing the triumphant wealthy wife. But her eyes darted nervously, calculating who was important enough to talk to. She was drowning in late notices, desperately using sequins to reflect light away from her ruin. I stood quietly by the pillar, sipping my water, letting cold satisfaction wash over me. They were standing on a trapdoor I had built, unaware I held the lever. I watched them perform, observing their subtle tells of panic. Derek kept checking his phone, likely waiting for an email from the acquiring conglomerate. Vanessa kept adjusting her posture, aggressively signaling superiority to classmates who opted for authentic lives. Eventually, Vanessa's restless gaze swept across the perimeter and locked directly onto me. I saw the physical jolt register in her body. She stiffened, her manicured hand gripping Derek's bicep. She whispered in his ear, pointing discreetly in my direction. Derek turned, his eyes widening in momentary shock before shifting into profound, arrogant amusement. He whispered back, puffing out his chest. They saw my unbranded dress and my lack of flashy jewelry. They saw exactly what I wanted them to see, a defeated solitary ghost. Vanessa detached herself and began marching toward me, navigating the crowded floor with the aggressive strut of a predator closing in on wounded prey. I maintained my relaxed posture against the pillar, my expression utterly blank. Lauren Vanessa gasped as she closed the final few feet. She placed a hand over her chest, feigning breathless shock. I literally cannot believe my eyes. You actually came. I took a slow, measured breath. Hello, Vanessa? She stepped closer, her perfume a suffocating cloud of synthetic jasmine. She reached out, attempting to place a pitying hand on my arm. I shifted my weight slightly, causing her hand to grasp empty air. She recovered quickly, tilting her head with an expression of deeply manufactured sympathy. Look at you, she cooed, her eyes raking over my navy dress with barely concealed disdain. You are so brave for showing up tonight. Derek and I were just talking about you. We were wondering if you were still living in the city. You have just been so quiet all these years. We honestly thought you might have moved back in with distant relatives after everything that happened. I live in the city, I replied evenly. I have been very focused on my work. Work, she repeated, drawing the word out as if it were a quaint concept. That is so good for you, Lauren. Keeping busy is important for the healing process. What is it you are doing now? Still crunching numbers in a cubicle somewhere. The corporate grind can be exhausting when doing it all on your own. I work in acquisitions, I stated simply. It keeps me fully occupied. Vanessa offered a condescending smile. Well, as long as it pays the rent. Derek and I have been so incredibly blessed. He is the regional director at his tech firm now. My boutiques are expanding so rapidly it is hard to keep up. We are looking at buying a second vacation home soon. We feel so lucky that we followed our hearts. The sheer audacity of her lie was a masterpiece of human delusion. She was standing there weeks away from having padlocks placed on her storefronts by my legal team bragging about buying a vacation home. It took every ounce of my disciplined corporate training not to laugh directly in her heavily contoured face. That sounds remarkably ambitious, I said, allowing ice to creep into my tone. Expansion requires a great deal of capital. I hope your commercial leases are securely managed. Vanessa blinked, a microscopic fracture appearing in her confident facade. The terminology briefly confused her, but her arrogance smoothed it over. We have people for that. We delegate trivial details to focus on the big picture. Honestly, I am just so relieved to see you doing okay. Derek felt terrible about how things ended, but we knew you would eventually find your footing. It builds character, right? Before I could dissect the psychological absurdity of her claiming to build my character by stealing my wedding funds, Derek materialized beside her. He slipped his arm around her waist in a performative display of ownership. His gaze lingered on my plain black clutch. Lauren, Derek said, dripping false warmth. It has been a long time. It takes guts to show up to an event like this, looking like you do. I tilted my head, studying his desperate need to establish dominance. It takes even more courage to live a complete lie, I replied quietly, watching his incredibly arrogant forced smile slowly begin to falter. Derek recovered quickly, his ego shielding him against my jab. He let out a harsh bark of laughter, running a hand over his straining suit jacket. A complete lie, he repeated, shaking his head as if pitying a child. Lauren, you always had a flair for the dramatic. That is why you never made it past the lower rungs of the corporate ladder. You let emotions dictate reality. Vanessa and I live in the real world. We deal in tangible success. He gestured expansively around the ballroom. You mentioned you work in acquisitions. What is that, processing paperwork for some mid-tier holding company? I kept my hands still at my sides, my voice maintaining a flat rhythm. I handle the structural integration of acquired assets. I said, I evaluate regional branches, identify operational redundancies, and eliminate them. I decide what parts of a company survive a merger and what parts are liquidated. Vanessa scoffed, swirling the red wine in her glass. Sounds incredibly tedious, she remarked, inspecting her manicured nails. Derek handles actual leadership. He manages people, drives revenue, and builds culture. His branch has been so incredibly successful that the parent company is undergoing a massive strategic merger. She leaned closer, dropping into a boastful whisper. We are not supposed to talk about it publicly yet, but Derek is about to secure a massive promotion. The acquiring conglomerate recognizes top-tier talent. Derek puffed out his chest, unable to resist inflating his own mythology. It is a highly sensitive transition, he declared, adjusting his watch again. Apex Solutions is being absorbed by one of the largest investment syndicates on the East Coast. The restructuring is going to be brutal for deadweight in the company, but for high performers like myself, it is a golden ticket. I have a closed-door meeting scheduled for tomorrow morning with the CEO of the acquiring firm. He is flying in personally to review my branch metrics. I allowed a razor-thin smile to grace my lips. The absolute delusion of the man standing in front of me was a fascinating psychological study. A private meeting with the CEO, I repeated, tasting the irony. That sounds critical. I have heard the CEO of that particular conglomerate is notoriously ruthless. He does not tolerate financial padding or fabricated growth projections. He terminates underperforming directors without offering severance packages. A bead of sweat appeared at the edge of Derek's hairline, betraying the intense pressure cooking beneath his artificial tan. He shifted his weight, his defensive instincts flaring. "You read too many sensationalized blogs, Lauren," he snapped, losing his forced warmth. "Men at that level understand regional management complexities. They know how to identify executives who drive aggressive expansion. The big boss and I speak the exact same language. We are both apex predators. Once I present my quarterly turnaround strategy tomorrow, he will have no choice but to name me Senior Vice President." "It is a guaranteed promotion," Vanessa chimed in, stepping closer to Derek. "We are already meeting with our broker next week to look at properties in the hills. The bonus structure alone will completely transform our portfolio. It is just a whole different stratosphere of wealth, Lauren. You probably cannot even conceptualize the numbers we are dealing with." I looked at Vanessa, locking onto her with cold, predatory stillness. I could conceptualize the numbers perfectly. I had personally authorized the foreclosure protocols on her 3 boutique locations just yesterday. I knew the exact dollar amount of the devastating legal fees she was about to face. "I am sure the numbers are staggering," I replied smoothly. "Maintaining multiple commercial leases while anticipating a corporate merger requires a delicate balancing act. One wrong move, and the entire structure collapses." Derek scowled, clearly annoyed that I was not awed by his impending ascension. "We do not worry about collapse," he stated firmly. "We build solid foundations. That is the difference between us and you. You play it safe, hiding in the background, nursing ancient grudges. We take massive risks and reap massive rewards. Tomorrow morning, my entire career elevates to the executive board level. And you will still be sitting in a cubicle processing paperwork for other people's victories." Before I could respond, a palpable shift in the ballroom atmosphere commanded our attention. The low hum of networking and forced laughter tapered off, replaced by a rising tide of frantic, hushed whispers. The string quartet playing softly in the corner abruptly stopped mid-measure. The heavy wooden double doors at the main entrance were suddenly flanked by 4 men wearing dark suits and earpieces. These were not standard event security. They moved with the synchronized, hypervigilant precision of an executive protection detail. Derek noticed the shift immediately. He craned his neck, trying to see over the crowd forming near the entrance. "What is going on?" he muttered, his bravado temporarily forgotten as he strained to identify the source of the commotion. The tension in the room thickened, transforming the air into a heavy weight. The event organizers scurried nervously around the entrance, speaking into their headsets. A few of our former classmates recognized the security detail and began elbowing each other, their faces pale with shock. The murmurs sweeping through the crowd carried fragments of a name that caused Derek's entire body to go rigid. "Is that someone famous?" Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. "Derek, look at the doors. People say a billionaire just walked in. Why would someone like that be at our college reunion?" Derek did not answer. He stared at the entrance, his jaw locked, his eyes wide with a sudden, inexplicable terror. The arrogant executive who had just bragged about his impending promotion was rapidly devolving into a panicked animal, realizing he was trapped in a cage. I stood perfectly still, my posture relaxed, my hands empty. The trap I had spent 8 years building was finally springing shut, and the executioner was walking right through the front door. Harrison Cole stepped through the double mahogany doors with the effortless command of a man who owned the building and everyone inside it. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that draped perfectly over his broad shoulders. But it was the child resting comfortably on his left hip that completely short-circuited the ballroom. Leo, wearing a miniature blazer identical to his father, scanned the sea of stunned faces with bright, curious eyes. The ambient noise of the reunion died instantly. The only sound was the synchronized clicking of Harrison polished Oxfords against the marble entryway as he bypassed the frantic event organizers. The string quartet had ceased playing entirely. Derek began to hyperventilate. I watched the arrogant flush completely drain from his face, leaving behind a sickly ashen gray. His chest heaved beneath his strained suit jacket. He recognized Harrison immediately. Every executive at Apex Solutions had memorized the face of the billionaire orchestrating their hostile takeover. Derek's hands, previously tucked confidently into his pockets, were now shaking visibly at his sides. He took a stumbling half-step backward, instinctively trying to use Vanessa as a human shield. The man who had just claimed to be an apex predator was visibly shrinking into a terrified prey animal. Vanessa remained oblivious to the corporate hierarchy, but she understood wealth and power. She stared at Harrison with hungry, wide eyes, completely misreading the situation. She smoothed her sequined dress, adjusting her posture as if hoping to catch the billionaire eye, entirely unaware that the man she was ogling was the architect of her impending financial slaughter. She desperately wanted to be noticed by the most important person in the room. Harrison cut a straight path through the parted crowd, ignoring the frantic whispers of my former classmates. He did not look left or right. His dark, predatory eyes locked directly onto me. The ruthless corporate titan persona melted, instantly replaced by a warm, genuine smile reserved exclusively for his family. He stopped right in front of our small, tense circle. The collective gasp from the surrounding crowd was audible. He leaned down, placing a soft, lingering kiss on my cheek, his free hand resting securely on the small of my back. "I am sorry to interrupt your evening, sweetheart," Harrison said, his deep voice carrying effortlessly in the dead quiet of the room. But Leo absolutely insisted he needed his mother to tuck him in, and frankly, I did not have the heart to tell him no. Leo beamed, reaching his little arms out for me. "Mommy, you said you would read the dinosaur book." I smiled, running my hand through his dark hair, feeling the solid, grounding presence of my son. "I did say that, did I not, my love? You are right on time, Harrison." The sharp, unmistakable sound of shattering crystal pierced the silence. Vanessa stood frozen, her fingers still curled around the stem of her wine glass, while the bowl lay in glittering shards at her feet. A pool of red wine seeped into the expensive carpet like blood. Her jaw was slack, her eyes darting frantically between Harrison, Leo, and me. The cognitive dissonance was breaking her brain. The woman she had just mocked for working in a cubicle was holding a billionaire heir and being kissed by a corporate titan. Harrison turned his attention to the trembling man standing inches away. Derek was practically vibrating with terror. His breathing was ragged, his eyes wide and bloodshot. Harrison extended his free hand with lethal politeness. "Harrison Cole," he said, his voice dropping into the cold, authoritative register he used in boardrooms. "I do not believe we have been formally introduced, though I recognize your name from the restructuring files. You are Derek, the Regional Director of the Pacific Northwest branch of Apex Solutions." Derek swallowed hard, his Adam apple bobbing erratically. A bead of sweat rolled down his temple, cutting a path through his artificial tan. He reached out with a trembling, clammy hand to shake Harrison's grasp. "Yes, sir. It is an absolute honor, Mr. Cole. I have a meeting scheduled with you tomorrow morning regarding the transition. I have prepared a comprehensive, aggressive turnaround strategy for the entire region." Harrison withdrew his hand, his expression turning to stone. "Actually, Derek, your meeting is not with me. I am the CEO, but I do not handle the microscopic details of branch liquidations. I leave the structural execution to my Senior Director of Mergers and Acquisitions." He stepped back, gesturing smoothly toward me. My wife, Lauren, holds absolute unilateral authority over the Apex Solutions portfolio. She is the one who decides which branches survive the merger and which executives are terminated without severance. You will be presenting your quarterly turnaround strategy to her tomorrow morning. The absolute physiological panic that seized Derek was a masterpiece of human devastation. His knees physically buckled, forcing him to grab the faux marble pillar just to remain standing. His mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. He gasped for air, his chest constricting as the catastrophic reality crushed his lungs. The woman he had just mocked, the woman he had abandoned with a $40,000 debt, was the exact corporate deity holding the axe over his entire career. He had just bragged about his massive upgrade to the very person who was actively writing his termination papers. Vanessa stared at me, her face contorting in sheer horror. The arrogant, wealthy facade she had desperately maintained completely disintegrated. She looked down at her fake designer shoes, then up at my unbranded, custom-tailored dress, finally understanding the catastrophic difference between performing wealth and actually wielding it. She tried to speak to formulate some kind of apology or excuse, but her throat simply clicked dryly. She was paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of her own miscalculation. I looked at Derek. My posture relaxed, my voice a deadly quiet whisper that carried the full weight of my corporate authority. As you mentioned earlier, Derek, it takes massive risks to reap massive rewards. I look forward to reviewing your branch metrics tomorrow at 8 sharp. Do not be late. We deal in tangible success after all. No hard feelings. It is just business. The transition from the hotel ballroom to my corporate office was seamless. By 7 in the morning, I was seated behind my mahogany desk. The city below was shrouded in fog, but inside my suite, the temperature was perfectly regulated. I reviewed the acquisition documents for Apex Solutions one last time. Every single clause regarding the liquidation of the Pacific Northwest branch was ironclad. Jamal had ensured there were absolutely no loopholes. At precisely 7:15, the silence of my office was shattered by the ring of my private direct line. This line bypassed my assistant completely. It was reserved exclusively for board members, high-level stakeholders, and Harrison. I picked up the receiver. The frantic, heavy breathing on the other end belonged to a man who had spent the entire night drowning in his impending ruin. "Lauren, please do not hang up." It was Derek. The audacity of his voice invading my sanctuary sent a ripple of revulsion through me. He must have desperately leveraged his expiring credentials to route a call directly through the executive switchboard. I leaned back in my leather chair, staring at the flashing red light on the console. I did not speak. I let the silence stretch across the connection, forcing him into the void. "I know you are there." Derek snapped, his tone shifting to a pathetic attempt at aggressive dominance. "I know you are listening. Look, we need to handle this like adults. What happened last night was a complete ambush. You set me up. You intentionally let me walk into that ballroom blind so you could pull some power trip with your billionaire husband." I remained entirely silent. His inability to tolerate the quiet was his greatest weakness. The aggressive facade crumbled almost immediately, giving way to the frantic gaslighting that had once been his signature maneuver. "You are clearly still holding on to anger." He continued, his voice taking on a patronizing cadence. "I get it. I hurt you. But look at the bigger picture. If you are honest, you know I did you a massive favor. If I had married you, you would have settled for a mediocre life. My leaving you was the catalyst. I made you who you are today, Lauren. You are sitting in that glass tower because I cut you loose. You owe me a thank you." The psychological acrobatics required to twist a $40,000 theft and a devastating betrayal into a philanthropic favor was astounding. He needed to believe it, because the alternative was admitting he was a parasite who discarded a diamond to pick up a rock. "Are you quite finished with your revisionist history, Derek?" I spoke, my voice a flat, emotionless razor. "You did not make me who I am. You proved exactly who you are. The woman sitting in this office was built in spite of you, not because of you. Do not confuse my resilience with your perceived benevolence." His breath hitched. The patronizing tone vanished, replaced by raw, unadulterated panic. "Lauren, please. You cannot fire me. I have a mortgage I cannot afford. I have car leases. Vanessa boutiques are bleeding us dry. If I lose this job, if I lose this upcoming bonus structure, we lose everything. We will be bankrupt before the end of the month. The apex predator from the ballroom had been reduced to a whimpering, terrified child, begging for a financial lifeline from the exact woman he had mocked just 12 hours prior. I need this job, Lauren. I need you to show some mercy. People make mistakes. You have billions of dollars now. You have everything. Firing me does nothing for you but satisfy a petty grudge. Please just keep the branch operational. Let me keep my title. I will do whatever you want. I will double my quotas. Just give me a chance to prove my worth to the new parent company. I swiveled my chair to face the window. I listened to a grown man dismantle his dignity over a phone line. He was offering empty promises, completely oblivious to the fact that his performance metrics were a manufactured illusion. Your worth to the new parent company is precisely zero, Derek, I stated. I reviewed your branch metrics. You falsified growth projections and pushed liabilities into the next fiscal quarter to artificially inflate your bonuses. You are an operational liability. Liquidating your branch is not a petty grudge, it is sound corporate strategy. The fact that it personally destroys you is simply a highly satisfying fringe benefit. You cannot do this to me, he shouted, his voice cracking into a high-pitched wail. I will sue the conglomerate for wrongful termination. You will do absolutely nothing, I countered smoothly. Your termination packet has already been digitized. It includes a comprehensive breakdown of your falsified reporting. If you threaten this conglomerate with a frivolous lawsuit, my legal team will release those findings to every recruiting agency in the sector. You will never work in technology again. A heavy, suffocating silence descended on the line. I could hear him hyperventilating the catastrophic reality of his situation, finally crushing the last remnants of his arrogance. He had no leverage. He had no escape route. He was entirely trapped in the prison he built for himself. Your termination is effective immediately, I concluded, my tone dismissing him completely. Security will be arriving at your regional office in exactly 20 minutes to escort you from the premises. Do not attempt to log into your terminal. Do not attempt to take any corporate assets. Have a pleasant morning, Derek. I pressed the flashing red button on the console, severing the connection and plunging my office back into absolute pristine silence. The first pillar of their fraudulent kingdom had just been demolished. I took a calm, deliberate sip of my coffee, savoring the bitter, dark flavor. Derek was handled. Now it was time to prepare the battlefield for Vanessa. The internal communication system on my desk chimed with a soft, urgent tone. It was my executive assistant, filtering a call from the ground floor security desk. I tapped the blinking console. Ms. Cole, my assistant, said, her voice conveying a mixture of professional calm and slight alarm. Security is holding a woman in the main lobby. She does not have an appointment, and she is becoming highly agitated. She claims to be a close personal friend of yours, a Ms. Vanessa. I leaned back in my leather chair, a slow, predatory smile touching my lips. The second pillar was crumbling even faster than I had anticipated. The sheer audacity required to ambush a secure corporate headquarters without an appointment was a testament to her absolute desperation. Do not have security remove her, I instructed smoothly. Tell them to direct her to the private executive receiving lounge on the second floor. I will meet her there. I stood up, smoothing the invisible lines of my tailored suit. I could have easily authorized security to escort her out of the building and onto the rain-slicked pavement. But I wanted to see the devastation up close. I wanted to witness the exact moment her fabricated reality collided with impenetrable corporate architecture. I took the private elevator down to the second-floor receiving lounge. The room was a masterpiece of intimidating modern design. Cold marble floors, sharp leather furniture, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the financial district below. It was a space designed to make visitors feel small and insignificant. When the glass doors slid open, the contrast between the environment and the woman standing inside was jarring. Vanessa looked nothing like the arrogant, sequined socialite who had swaggered through the reunion ballroom 12 hours ago. Her hair was pulled into a frantic, messy knot. She was wearing oversized sunglasses, likely hiding the physical evidence of a sleepless night, and a designer trench coat that looked completely out of place against the sterile corporate backdrop. As I stepped into the room, she whipped around. The oversized sunglasses came off, revealing bloodshot eyes, and mascara smeared across her cheekbones. The moment she saw me, her entire posture collapsed into a performative display of profound agony. "Lauren," she gasped, her voice trembling with manufactured emotion. She took 2 rapid steps forward, her arms extending as if she intended to pull me into a desperate embrace. I did not move a muscle. I simply raised one hand, palm facing outward, executing a firm nonverbal command to halt. The gesture was so chillingly authoritative that Vanessa physically froze in her tracks, her arms dropping awkwardly to her sides. "Take a seat, Vanessa," I said, gesturing to the heavy leather chair opposite a glass coffee table. "You have exactly 5 minutes before I summon security." She collapsed into the chair, burying her face in her hands. The sobbing began immediately. It was a loud, theatrical weeping designed to elicit immediate sympathy. 8 years ago, that sound would have made me drop everything to comfort her. Today it sounded like a poorly rehearsed audition tape. "I am so sorry," she wailed, peering at me through her fingers to gauge my reaction. "I am so incredibly sorry for everything. Last night, seeing the life you built, it broke me, Lauren. It made me realize the horrific magnitude of my mistakes." I sat on the edge of the leather sofa opposite her, resting my hands neatly in my lap. "You are not crying because of your mistakes, Vanessa. You are crying because you finally realized who holds the deed to your miserable life." She choked on a sob, wiping her nose with the back of her hand. The facade shifted seamlessly. The weeping subsided, replaced by a desperate pleading victimhood. And right on cue, she threw the man she had stolen entirely under the bus. "It was Derek," she cried, leaning forward across the glass table. "He manipulated me, Lauren. You have to believe me. We were so young back then, and he was so charming. He convinced me that you two were falling apart, that the wedding was a sham. He told me he was going to leave you regardless, and he pressured me into running away with him. I was weak. I was a naive girl caught in his web of lies." The sheer velocity with which she discarded her husband of 8 years was breathtaking. Derek had just spent his morning begging for his job by claiming he did me a favor, and now Vanessa was sitting in my corporate lounge claiming she was a victim of his psychological manipulation. They were two parasites frantically trying to eat each other to survive. "You were 26 years old," I stated, my voice devoid of a single ounce of empathy. "You were an adult. You actively helped him drain my accounts, you stole the bridesmaid funds, and you spent a month in Europe on my credit. Do not insult my intelligence by playing the manipulated victim. You made a calculated financial transaction. It just turned out to be a very bad investment." Vanessa recoiled, but the desperation driving her was too strong to let her quit. She swallowed hard, abandoning the fake apology to pivot directly to her actual agenda. "I know about Obsidian Holdings," she blurted out, her voice dropping to a frantic, breathless pitch. "I got the late notices from the property management firm. I saw the corporate structure attached to your conglomerate. You own the buildings, Lauren. You own the retail spaces my boutiques operate in. I hold the master leases," I confirmed coldly. "And you are currently in severe default." She lunged forward, pressing her hands flat against the glass table. "Please, Lauren. I am begging you. Those stores are my entire life. They are everything I have worked for. The retail market has been brutal this quarter, and the supply chain issues crippled my margins. If you enforce the eviction, I lose my entire inventory. I go bankrupt." She stared at me with wide, pleading eyes, deploying the ultimate weapon of female solidarity. "Woman to woman, please. We used to be best friends. We shared everything. Do not take my business away from me. Just give me a 6-month rent reduction. Forgive the back rent. Give me a chance to restructure my debts, and I swear I will pay you back every single cent. Just give me a break." I looked at the woman who had stolen my wedding funds, slept with my fiancé, and left me with $40,000 of devastating debt. She was sitting in a building I owned, begging for financial mercy while draped in a designer coat she bought on credit. The audacity was not just insulting, it was a spectacular display of narcissistic delusion. She actually believed that her tears could erase a decade of malice. I remained seated watching her squirm under the weight of my silence. The trap was fully set. She had confessed her financial ruin, admitted her desperation, and thrown her husband to the wolves. She had handed me all the ammunition I needed. Now it was time to let the forensic accounting drop the final fatal bomb on their fraudulent existence. I let the silence stretch out thick and suffocating. I did not blink. I did not shift my posture. I simply sat on the edge of the leather sofa and observed her with the detached curiosity of a scientist studying a microscopic specimen. Vanessa's frantic breathing echoed in the cavernous executive lounge, her desperate eyes searching my face for any flicker of emotion. She was desperately waiting for the massive explosion. She was waiting for me to scream, to throw a glass, to hurl insults about her betrayal 8 years ago. She knew how to handle an emotional adversary because emotion made people predictable. Emotion made people weak. But I gave her absolutely nothing. No anger, no validation, no forgiveness. I offered her a terrifying bottomless void. Your request for a lease modification has been formally noted. I stated, my voice as flat and unyielding as a sheet of ice. My property management division will process the relevant paperwork according to standard corporate protocols. That concludes our business today, Vanessa. She stared at me, her jaw dropping slightly as her brain struggled to comprehend the sheer lack of dramatic payoff. That is it, she stammered, her hands gripping the edge of the glass table. You are just going to note my request, Lauren. I am pouring my heart out to you. I am telling you my marriage is a sham and my business is dying. I need to know if you are going to destroy me. I stood up slowly, towering over her seated form. You destroyed yourself the moment you signed commercial leases you could not afford with money you did not have, I replied smoothly. My real estate trust is merely the gravitational force pulling you back down to earth. Security will escort you to the lobby. I turned on my heel and walked out of the lounge, never once looking back. I did not need to see her face to know she was shattering. I could hear her frantic, panicked breathing until the heavy glass doors sealed shut behind me. Returning to my penthouse suite office, I immediately pulled up the internal security network on my terminal. The executive receiving lounge was equipped with high-definition audio-visual recording systems, a standard compliance protocol for a multi-billion-dollar investment conglomerate. I downloaded the encrypted file of our entire conversation. I watched the high-definition playback on my screen, studying the exact moment Vanessa threw Derek under the bus, weeping about his manipulation and her naive victimhood. I archived the file into a highly secure folder on our private servers. The digital grave they were digging for themselves was getting deeper by the hour. My desk console began to blink with incoming notifications. My assistant had routed a series of voicemails from my secure external line. Derek, having been physically escorted from his regional office by my security team earlier that morning, was currently spiraling into a spectacular meltdown. I pressed play, leaning back in my chair to listen to the symphony of his destruction. The first voicemail was a barrage of aggressive threats. He screamed into the receiver, promising to expose my conglomerate to the press, claiming he had insider knowledge of illegal corporate restructuring. It was a pathetic, empty bluff from a man who barely understood his own branch metrics, let alone the macroeconomics of our syndicate. The second voicemail, left exactly 42 minutes later, shifted into desperate bargaining. He offered to work for minimum wage. He offered to demote himself to a junior analyst position. He begged me to remember the good times we shared in college, attempting to weaponize a nostalgia that I had long since burned to ash. The third and final voicemail, recorded just after noon, was the most damning. His voice was slurred, indicating he had likely retreated to a bar after his termination. "You think you are so smart, Lauren?" he slurred into the phone. "But you do not know everything. I moved money around at that branch. I moved a lot of money to keep Vanessa afloat. If you audit those accounts, you are going to find a mess that will tank your precious acquisition. You need me to fix the ledgers. You need me, Lauren." I stopped the playback. A cold, electric thrill shot down my spine. Derek, in his drunken, terrified panic, had just handed me the absolute holy grail of corporate warfare. He had essentially confessed to financial crimes on a recorded line, believing he could use his own embezzlement as leverage against me. He fundamentally misunderstood the power dynamics at play. He thought he possessed a hostage, but he had just handed me a signed confession. I extracted the audio files, securely encrypting them and forwarding them directly to Jamal. My brother-in-law was already leading the forensic accounting team through the acquisition audit, and Derek's drunken voicemail was the exact roadmap we needed to uncover the bodies buried in his branch ledgers. For the rest of the afternoon, I sat in my office and watched the surveillance feeds and listened to the digital evidence pile up. They were doing all the heavy lifting for me. Vanessa was leaving panicked voicemails on Derek's phone, unaware that my legal team had already legally seized his company-issued mobile device during his termination. Derek was leaving drunken confessions on my corporate line. They were trapped in a rapidly shrinking box, suffocating on the toxic fumes of their own desperate decisions. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to engage in petty squabbles or dramatic confrontations. I simply needed to provide them with enough rope to hang themselves, and they were sprinting toward the gallows with breathtaking speed. Every lie they told, every frantic threat they made, and every ounce of blame they shifted onto each other was meticulously cataloged, verified, and secured in our impenetrable legal vault. The sun began to slowly set over the vast financial district, casting long, sharp shadows across the floor of my office. The preliminary skirmishes were over. The psychological warfare had yielded catastrophic results for my enemies. I closed my heavy laptop and stood up slowly, looking out at the sprawling city below. The final pieces of evidence had been successfully gathered, sorted, and weaponized. The ultimate strike was fully prepped. All that remained was the absolute merciless execution of the final phase, a reckoning that would permanently erase them from the corporate world forever. The absolute merciless execution of the final phase commenced the very next morning. The sharp click of the heavy mahogany doors sliding open pulled my attention away from the panoramic view of the financial district. Jamal strode into my office, bringing with him the crisp, electrified air of impending victory. He bypassed the leather visitor chairs entirely and walked straight to my desk. In his right hand, he carried a thick black binder secured with a biometric lock. This was not a standard quarterly earnings report. This was a forensic accounting dossier, the kind of document that dismantled careers, froze offshore bank accounts, and sent arrogant executives to federal prison. Jamal placed the binder on the center of my desk. He did not smile. The warm, jovial brother-in-law who built block cities with my son had vanished completely, replaced by the ruthless chief legal officer who orchestrated corporate executions. He pressed his thumb against the biometric scanner. The lock flashed green and the binder popped open. "I told you the drunken voicemail gave us the roadmap," Jamal said, his deep voice resonating with cold, lethal satisfaction. "But even I underestimated the sheer breathtaking stupidity of the man you almost married." Derek did not just move money around to inflate his branch metrics. He actively, repeatedly, and aggressively embezzled corporate funds. I leaned forward, my eyes scanning the top sheet of the summary report. Rows of highlighted transactions detailed a systematic bleeding of the Pacific Northwest branch accounts. The total sum sitting at the bottom of the page was highlighted in bright, undeniable crimson. $150,000. "He stole $150,000, I stated, reading the number aloud to let the reality of his crime settle into the quiet air of my office. $154,220 to be exact, Jamal corrected, pulling out a flowchart that mapped the illicit transactions. He executed this over the course of the last 14 months. As you know, the parent company gave regional directors discretionary budgets for localized marketing and independent contractor acquisitions. Derek created 3 fictitious consulting firms. He generated fake invoices for market analysis and brand synergy consulting, approved the invoices himself using his regional director credentials, and wired the corporate funds directly out of the branch operating accounts. I studied the flowchart tracing the lines of stolen money. Setting up ghost contractors was one of the oldest, most pathetic methods of corporate theft in the book. It was an amateur move, the kind of sloppy financial crime that was guaranteed to be caught during any standard acquisition audit. Derek had only managed to survive this long because Apex Solutions was too busy hemorrhaging capital to properly audit their regional directors. But the money had to go somewhere, I said, looking up at Jamal. Ghost contractors require shell accounts to receive the wire transfers. Where did he funnel the stolen capital? Jamal finally smiled, a sharp, predatory expression that communicated absolute triumph. That is the masterpiece of this entire operation, Lauren. He did not funnel the money into offshore accounts or crypto wallets. He did not buy a yacht or hide it in the Cayman Islands. He wired the embezzled funds directly into the operating accounts of Vanessa Boutique Chain. A sharp, breathless laugh escaped my lips. The sheer, magnificent irony of the situation was almost too perfect to comprehend. Derek had committed federal wire fraud and corporate embezzlement to steal over $150,000, all to desperately float the sinking ship of Vanessa fraudulent retail empire. He stole from his employer to pay her commercial rent, I concluded, visualizing the entire horrific cycle of their debt. Exactly, Jamal confirmed, tapping the final column of the forensic report. And do you remember who holds the master leases for those commercial properties? Your private real estate trust. Derek committed federal felonies to steal money, which he then gave to Vanessa, who then unknowingly wired that exact same stolen money directly into your personal investment portfolio to keep her doors open. You have been financially draining them from both sides of the equation. I sat back in my leather chair, letting the absolute magnitude of their self-destruction wash over me. They were not just bad at business, they were criminals. They had escalated from stealing my bridesmaid funds to defrauding a major technology firm. Their desperation to maintain the illusion of extreme wealth had driven them to commit serious felonies. This elevates the situation significantly. I noted, my mind already calculating the legal ramifications. This is no longer just about liquidating an underperforming branch or terminating a toxic executive. This is a criminal matter. Jamal nodded, his expression turning deadly serious. I have already contacted our liaisons at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Corporate embezzlement exceeding $100,000, utilizing interstate wire transfers, triggers immediate federal jurisdiction. I submitted a preliminary brief to the White Collar Crime Division this morning. They are highly interested. They have requested the full forensic dossier the moment you officially terminate his employment. We have them completely surrounded, I murmured, trailing my fingers over the black binder. Vanessa will be slapped with an immediate eviction and a lawsuit for breached contract damages. When the authorities seize her boutique assets as part of the embezzlement investigation, she will lose whatever inventory she has left. Derek will be fired, stripped of his unvested stock options, and handed directly over to federal agents. They built a kingdom on a fault line, Jamal said, closing the binder. And you are about to trigger the earthquake. The final acquisition board meeting is scheduled for tomorrow at 9 in the morning. The executive team from Apex Solutions is flying in. Derek has been instructed to attend to present his regional turnaround strategy. He still thinks he is getting a promotion. I stood up and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out at the sprawling financial district. The city was a grid of rules, contracts, and consequences. Derek and Vanessa had tried to cheat the system, leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. They thought they could outrun their past, but their past had simply built a better, stronger cage to hold them. Prepare the termination papers, I instructed Jamal without turning away from the window. Draft the eviction notices for Vanessa Boutiques. Notify the federal agents that we will have a package ready for them tomorrow morning. Let Derek walk into that boardroom expecting a crown. I am going to hand him a prison sentence instead. The morning sun pierced the executive boardroom, casting light across the mahogany table. The Apex executives filed in looking haggard, opening their laptops nervously. Jamal sat to my right, radiating absolute authority. Harrison delegated this execution to me, knowing my presence alone would deliver maximum psychological impact. At exactly 9 a.m., the heavy mahogany doors swung open. Derek walked in wearing a tailored suit undoubtedly purchased on another maxed-out credit card. He carried a leather portfolio, swaggering like a man about to conquer the world. Ignoring his executive team, his eyes locked onto the head of the table, expecting Harrison Cole. Instead, he saw me. Derek froze. The arrogant smile fractured. He blinked rapidly, his brain trying to process why the woman he abandoned 8 years ago was sitting in the chairman's seat. I gestured toward the empty chair across from me. "Take your seat, Derek," I instructed. "We have a tight schedule and your presentation is first." He swallowed hard, stumbling toward the chair, placing his portfolio on the mahogany surface. "The Apex CEO." Richard leaned forward nervously. "Ms. Cole." Richard began. Derek prepared a comprehensive turnaround strategy for the Pacific Northwest branch. We believe his metrics demonstrate significant revenue growth potential. "By all means, Derek," I said smoothly. "Walk us through your metrics. Show the board exactly how you have been driving such remarkable growth." Derek opened his portfolio. His hands trembled so violently the papers rattled. He cleared his throat, launching into a heavily rehearsed presentation, throwing out buzzwords about market synergy and aggressive expansion. He clicked through a slideshow displaying padded revenue forecasts. It was a pathetic, desperate performance. He was sweating profusely, darting frantic looks to my unyielding face, searching for any sign of mercy. He found none. After 10 minutes of listening to his fabricated corporate fiction, I raised a single hand. The room fell silent. Derek stopped mid-sentence, his chest heaving as if he had run a marathon. "Your presentation is highly creative, Derek," I stated, my voice slicing through the heavy air. "But it lacks a certain financial authenticity. Jamal, please distribute the updated branch metrics to the Apex executive team." Jamal stood up smoothly. He handed a thick, black-bound dossier to the Apex CEO, then slid an identical folder directly across the table until it stopped perfectly in front of Derek. Derek stared down at the black cover, as if it were a live explosive. "What you are looking at is a forensic accounting audit of the Pacific Northwest branch," I explained. "We do not rely on self-reported slideshows during an acquisition. We rely on hard data. Turn to page 4 to find a detailed breakdown of 3 independent consulting firms your branch contracted over the past 14 months. The Apex CEO flipped open the dossier. The color instantly drained from his face. Derek remained entirely paralyzed, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. "Those consulting firms do not exist," I continued, my voice echoing with lethal precision. "They are ghost entities created by you, Derek. You fabricated invoices, approved those invoices using your regional director credentials, and wired funds directly out of your operating accounts. You embezzled exactly $154,220 from your employer." The boardroom erupted into chaos. The Apex executives began shouting frantically, flipping through the evidence. Richard turned to Derek with a look of unadulterated horror. "You stole from us," Richard gasped. "You forged these vendor accounts." Derek could not speak. He was hyperventilating, his eyes wide and bloodshot, staring at the damning red ink highlighted in the dossier. He looked up at me, his face twisted in absolute terror. "Lauren, please." He choked out, his voice cracking into a high-pitched whine. "You cannot do this. We can fix this. I can explain the transfers." "You transferred the stolen corporate funds directly into the commercial operating accounts of your wife's failing retail boutiques," Jamal interjected, silencing the chaotic room. "Boutiques that are currently in massive default on their master leases. You committed federal wire fraud to float a bankrupt business." I reached into a slim folder resting beside me. I pulled out a single sheet of paper and slid it across the long mahogany table. It glided smoothly, coming to a halt on top of his forensic dossier. "This is your formal termination notice, effective immediately," I stated. "You are stripped of unvested stock options. Your corporate access is permanently revoked, and you are barred from corporate properties." Derek stared at the termination letter, tears welling in his eyes. He was completely broken, stripped of his title, his income, and his freedom. But I was not finished. I pulled out a second document. I slid it across the table, watching it land right next to his termination papers. "And this, Derek, is a personal invoice," I said, my voice dropping to a cold, razor-sharp whisper. "8 years ago, you drained our joint accounts and left me with a $40,000 credit card debt for a wedding you abandoned. I have meticulously tracked that debt, with standard market compound interest plus the legal fees required to freeze the fraudulent European charges you and Vanessa racked up. Your outstanding balance to me personally is $92,400. Derek stared at the invoice. The itemized list of catering charges, floral deposits, and luxury resort fees stared back at him. He finally understood the absolute, inescapable magnitude of the trap. He had mocked a girl in a cheap apartment, completely unaware he was insulting the architect of his total annihilation. "You are ruined, Derek," I stated, locking onto his terrified, weeping face. "You are bankrupt, you are unemployable, and your fraudulent kingdom has officially burned to the ground. Security is waiting outside the double doors to escort you out. Gather your portfolio and leave before the federal agents arrive to finalize your arrest." Derek did not move. His body remained entirely paralyzed, pinned to the expensive leather chair by the crushing gravity of his actions. He stared at the itemized invoice and the termination letter, his chest rising and falling in erratic, shallow gasps. The remaining executives from Apex Solutions physically distanced themselves from him, pushing their chairs back. I simply shifted my gaze to the heavy mahogany doors at the back of the boardroom and gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The doors swung open. 2 uniformed security guards stepped inside, but they were immediately flanked by 3 individuals wearing dark suits and federal credentials clipped to their belts. The Federal Bureau of Investigation had arrived precisely on schedule. Special Agent Vance stepped forward, holding a thick file that matched the forensic dossier sitting on the table. Derek, the agent, announced, his voice carrying the uncompromising weight of federal authority. "You are under arrest for corporate embezzlement and interstate wire fraud. Please stand up and place your hands behind your back." He was hauled to his feet, his designer suit rumpling awkwardly as his arms were wrenched behind him. As the agents escorted him toward the door, he looked back at me one last time. There was no arrogance left, no smug superiority. There was only the hollow, terrified realization that he was entirely powerless. I maintained a cold, unyielding eye contact until the heavy doors clicked shut behind him, sealing his fate. It was a truly magnificent sight indeed. The boardroom remained dead silent for a full minute after his departure. I turned my attention back to the Apex CEO, who looked as though he might be physically ill. "We will resume the restructuring discussion in exactly 15 minutes, I stated smoothly. "Please take this time to review the revised integration protocols Jamal has prepared for you." I stood up and walked out of the room, leaving them to sweat. Jamal followed me down the corridor toward my executive suite. As soon as the glass doors of my office sealed behind us, Jamal pulled out his encrypted smartphone. He tapped a single button on the screen and placed the device on my desk. "The property management team is on site at the flagship boutique," Jamal reported, pulling up a live security feed from the commercial property cameras. I watched the high-definition footage stream across the screen. 2 local sheriffs stood on the sidewalk alongside my property managers. Vanessa was standing outside the heavy glass doors of her store. She was screaming, her face contorted in absolute hysteria, aggressively waving her arms at the officers. A heavy steel chain was being wrapped tightly around the brass handles of the boutique entrance. A bright orange eviction notice was slapped directly onto the glass, declaring the immediate seizure of all internal assets to cover the breached contract damages and the frozen embezzled funds. "She is completely locked out," Jamal explained, watching her pound her fists against the locked doors. "Her bank accounts were frozen an hour ago by the federal authorities investigating Derek. Her credit cards are maxed out, her inventory is officially property of your real estate trust, and her husband is currently sitting in a federal holding cell. They have absolutely nothing left. Not a single dollar, not a shred of dignity. The empire of lies they built on your stolen money has been completely pulverized." I watched the screen as Vanessa sank to the pavement, weeping uncontrollably on the sidewalk, while pedestrians walked past her, ignoring her dramatic collapse. It was the exact same feeling of crushing, isolated despair she had left me to experience 8 years ago. The karmic loop had officially closed. I turned off the monitor. There was no need to watch the rest. The spectacle of their suffering was no longer interesting to me. The debt was settled, the ledger was balanced, and my focus immediately returned to the massive corporate empire I was running. I walked back into the boardroom 15 minutes later, projecting the absolute calm of a woman who had just taken out the trash. The Apex executives were highly compliant. Without Derek's fabricated numbers inflating their valuation, they had no leverage left to negotiate. We finalized the acquisition terms in under an hour, securing a highly lucrative asset for our conglomerate at a fraction of the initial projected cost. I dismissed the executives, instructing my integration team to begin the immediate absorption of their viable departments. The hostile takeover was a total and completely unmitigated success. By late afternoon, the adrenaline of the corporate slaughter had faded into a deep, resonant peace. I walked back into my private suite, poured a glass of sparkling water, and opened the heavy glass doors leading out to my private executive balcony. The sprawling financial district stretched out before me, a massive grid of steel and glass gleaming in the fading afternoon sunlight. I walked to the edge of the railing and looked down at the streets below. Harrison stepped onto the balcony, wrapping his arms around my waist from behind. He rested his chin on my shoulder, his solid, unwavering presence a perfect anchor. "It is done," he murmured, looking out at the city we dominated together. "It is done," I agreed, leaning back against his chest. I closed my eyes, truly feeling the absolute security of the life I had built. The terrified, heartbroken 26-year-old girl was a distant memory. I had taken the absolute worst betrayal imaginable and forged it into an impenetrable corporate weapon. Derek and Vanessa had originally tried to bury me. I had grown into a massive, untouchable titan, rooting myself deeply into the very foundation of the city they tried to conquer. Success was not just the best revenge. It was the only revenge that truly mattered. I opened my eyes, staring at the empire I commanded, ready to conquer whatever challenge dared to cross my path next. Being abandoned at the altar and left with crushing debt is a scenario designed to break a person. When profound betrayal comes from those we trust most, a partner and a best friend, it leaves a void that feels impossible to survive. However, the most vital lesson extracted from this journey is that rock bottom can serve as the ultimate foundation. Instead of allowing trauma to dictate a future of misery and victimhood, that raw agony can be transmuted into an unstoppable drive for self-reliance. It is incredibly tempting to crave immediate, loud retaliation when wronged. Yet true power does not lie in screaming matches or public, tearful confrontations. It lies in the quiet, disciplined, and relentless grind. While the architects of the betrayal spent years performing a desperate, debt-fueled illusion of happiness, for an audience of strangers, real tangible success was being forged in the shadows. The lesson here is crystal clear. Dedicating your energy entirely to your own personal and professional growth creates an impenetrable fortress. You do not need an apology from those who broke you to put yourself back together. If you build your empire high enough, their fragile, fabricated realities will eventually crash against your walls. Karma is rarely a mystical, invisible force. It is usually just the natural consequence of poor, malicious choices finally catching up with arrogant people. By focusing entirely on mastering a craft and surrounding oneself with a chosen, fiercely loyal family, absolute leverage is secured. Success earned through merit and silent perseverance is the only vengeance that truly matters and the only one that leaves you whole. Take that lingering pain from your own past and channel it into building your most formidable future today.